Hello and welcome to the Killen Report. I'm your host today, Johnathan Kleid, principal of the Kleid Design Group Fine Custom Cabinetry in Oakland, California. We have a very special guest and I'm delighted that he's with us today, the wonderful artist, entrepreneur, climate change provocateur, and my friend, Michael Killen. Michael, good to see you. Welcome.
Nice to see you. Thank you, Jonathan.
Why you're so interested in Florida?
Florida is possibly ground zero for all hell that's going to hit us as climate change continues to grow in force. And as the North and South poles melt and all that water has to go somewhere, and the seas rise 20, 30 feet. You know, it's inevitable. This is going to happen. And that down the road, probably for children born today, they might not be born in Florida. Florida may be gone.
Really?
Yeah.
So is there a time frame that's associated?
Oh, I'd say before the end of the century. But long before the end of the century, you think we have flooding and sea level rise right now, and droughts and fires and hurricanes and cyclones. We are going to have more and more of those as every single day goes by, unless the people of California, people in the United States and the rest of the world, take stock of what's going on and take active efforts, measures to stop the growth of climate change. And now, if you want to ask me some questions about Florida's climate plan, now that I have mentioned they are the most vulnerable state in the union, and and they should have, no doubt, the gold standard in climate change.
They should.
Plan.
Well, they should, but it's my understanding that actually California is the gold standard by which things are measured. And to that point, talk to me about those differences and what this means.
Okay, so last night I stepped out of my house and my neighbor was coming home and he said to me, "Michael, you're going to be in some TV shows I hear tomorrow." I said, "Yes, I'm going to do a show I'm going to be a guest with the great Johnathan Kleid, and I'm going to answer questions about California's climate plan." And he says to me, "Michael, aren't your shows usually a half hour?" I said, "Yes." He says, "What's it going to take? 3 minutes?" All right, now, Florida's climate plan. I Googled it multiple times, and I came up with the state's plan dated 2008. I could not find that Florida has a up-to-date modern plan. 2008. And then I looked at some of the pages, and I want to say, I couldn't follow them. They were so weak, so badly organized. No dates, no objectives. The state of Florida does not, from what I have seen, have a climate change plan. The state that's going to possibly be wiped out.
Well, this is kind of huge in the sense that you had described it previously as perhaps being ground zero for this whole shift in this country, and that there is no up-to-date, current, dated, cogent plan at all, as you've said.
Yeah. Now, Miami-Dade area, the southeastern part of the state, a group of counties have gotten together, and they, have the right to use the word climate change as a group, and they are working to try to share good practices and and keep the state, the counties, a group of them, trying to move forward and prepare and to try to mitigate and try to put resilient practices and infrastructure in place. That's about it for the state of Florida. The central part of the government is not into this, as far as I can see. And I want to remind you that a former governor, Rick Scott, I think, if I remember correctly, during a Republican, and during his administration, when Al Gore was pretty much warning us about the threat of climate change, he forbid his government from talking about or writing about climate change and global warming. I mean, this is something that came down from the top. And that mentality still permeates, still carries forward in the state. I took a look at the new governor. His name is DeSantis. Maybe I get the name a little bit.
No, but that's the name.
I looked at his announcements, one after another. I never saw, the environment. He's got something for the environment. They're going to do something special to protect water, drinking water. He's hired a science leader for the state. The man's background is in oceanography, and I look at his statements. There is no mention of climate change to speak of, or global warming. He's going to worry about the fish, which is important, but the monster is climate change. The putting up greenhouse gases around the planet, boiling us, melting the ice, that's the real monster. So you have a state whose government is still stuck with not being able to acknowledge climate change. And the present governor of the state, he sounds like, in his statements, he wants to be liked by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. And this is not a political thing that I'm saying. I think these are all factual things. Trump denies, although I tend to think he knows about the threat of climate change. But as you know, he withdrew the United States from the worldwide...
The Paris Accord, yeah.
Yes, and he's doing his best to not use the word climate change or to make it a word that liberals use that's foolish. And so DeSantis sounds like Trump. He does not mention the biggest threat the United States, the planet, faces. And he's also a Republican. And I tend to think the people of Florida, you have very smart people down there, then the retired people, they have to do something about this situation. The state that's going to be hit the hardest should be the one that has the gold standard at trying to save themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, in your investigation of what you could find, even though you said that the last thing that seemed to have a date on it was in 2008, was there anything that you found, were there any essentials of a Florida plan that you could glean?
Any
essentials of the plan that you could glean?
A plan must have objectives and goals, dates, numbers. We're going to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions coming out of this by 20% by 2030. There's none of that.
None of it.
I didn't see anything. The most progressive, the most important thing is from the southeastern group of counties that have gotten together to take the initiative to do something positive. And I take my hat off to them. And It's a scary situation. And that reminds me.
Well, before we get to the book, I want to ask you. You are well known internationally for putting these situations onto canvas. Are there any plans? Because, as you said, this is a very dire situation. Do you have any plans with regard to the situation in Florida to paint that particular issue?
Florida is very important to me, but so is Alabama and a lot of other. I don't know if I would devote my time to making major paintings and television shows on Florida. But I would say if the government of Florida or some large organization said to me, Michael, paint, and we have to have money too, paint the issues in Florida and do it in such a way that you help educate the people to vote people into Congress, into the White House, into the governor's office that recognize the threat of climate change. I would be glad, I'd be challenged, I would love to do it, and I'd love nothing better than to go to Tampa and make some radio and TV shows, go over to Miami, make some TV with advocates and educated people who want to educate the people and influence the state in a positive way. I'd like to go to Jacksonville, Gainesville, Orlando, and other places and make a whole series of shows. But they have to want me, and I'd be glad to do it. And again, make the paintings like I make right now that help bring attention and understanding to these issues that are so important to all of us.
I agree, and I think that it's no small thing that our military complex has also indicated that national security point of view is absolutely at critical mass at this point, and that's going to be one of the big things having to do with this country's security is climate change. And to that end, you started to reach for this book. Why don't you talk a little bit about the book?
This book is title up above is a national bestseller. I heard about it on a news program. It's called America's War, and it's by a fellow named Omar L. Akkad, A-K-K-A-D. I get a great kick out of this book. And by the way, when I opened it up, and this led to me going to you and suggesting we do Florida, when I opened up this book, I found a map of the United States. There is no Florida in the map. This is a book, fascinating book, that starts out in something like 2074. The United States has enacted the Future Sustainability Act, and part of that act is it prohibits the use of fossil fuel in the United States. And guess what? There are several southern states that find that they do not want to do things that the whole United States, the rest of it, want to do, and they secede from the Union. And another war starts out. So one can say this climate change has the potential of breaking up the United States, starting another civil war. And it's easy to see that, again, the South will go down in disarray, in disaster. But this book also allows you to get a feel for life may be like for our children, our grandchildren, and God you and I, none of us would want to be living in any country when all hell breaks loose.
Right. Well, it's a very, very scary thought. It deals also, doesn't it, with Middle East issues and our involvement in the Middle East, and potentially then if we've got energy policies that are, fossil fuel driven, still, what happens if those sources of energy are just simply unavailable to us?
Well, it does talk about there are still people driving, they now call them fossil fuel cars. And you cannot, from what I determined so far in this book, I haven't finished it, you wouldn't want to drive that by a policeman in the north. And then they have motorboats. And they point out that the motorboats just go chug, chug, chug along the water very, very slowly because they are fueled by solar. Somehow or another, this young writer has discovered that the sun and solar, everybody may be talking about it today, but the reality is the energy density is so, and the intermittent services is so limited that these motorboats are just dragging along, and there's an illegal motorboat running on gasoline going 5 times, 10 times faster. This book gives you a feel for what life may be like and what people think about their situation. And again, I haven't finished it yet, but I'm already starting to feel that a wall may be built on the border of Florida and the rest of the country, and that the Floridians, and I used to be a Floridian once, the Floridians have now become the immigrants, and they got to get up north where it's safe. Safe, at least having a civil society with some police, some orders, some government, as opposed to the chaos that has now developed. So this is like a 1984 book, George Orwell, and God forbid we allow this kind of situation to develop. But this is probably one of the best books to tell the story, to help wake people up of what we need to do to avoid possibly the destruction of this earth. And I now remember a quote by Stephen Hawkins about climate change. He says it could lead to the earth becoming as hot as Venus. There's nobody living on Venus, I don't think. And I mean, that means the end of all of us.
Understood. It's interesting. I'll ask you the same question that I asked you about Florida, again, because of your tendency to paint in ways to help people understand the situation. Has America's War, the book, inspired Michael Killen, the artist, to perhaps put some of this on canvas?
Okay, here's what I could do. I could paint an image of the state of California, what it looks like, okay. And I've had in my mind for quite a while a Bruegel painting. I can't remember the name of it, but Bruegel made this fantastic painting, and you actually have squads of skeletons. It's the end. I could make a painting where I have the state of California, and here's what I think is going to happen. We could have tens of thousands, but I would only put a few, nuclear power plants all around the state. And you know what they're doing? They have arms and chimneys that sort of reach up into the sky, and these hands are trying to pull down the greenhouse gases that are up there. And you'll need a lot of nuclear power plants, and you can't do it with solar, you can't do it with coal plants, of course. And they're trying desperately to pull down the greenhouse gas emissions, and they're also plants, those solar plants are trying to desalinate the ocean water so that we have some water for the people and to grow things. That's an image that comes to mind. Oh, and then I would have some ships off the coast, the Atlantic coast, and they would be releasing chemicals up into the atmosphere to form clouds that block the rays of the sun to keep the land and the oceans from further getting hotter.
Interesting.
I'll probably do it.
Yeah.
What keeps me maybe from doing it is because there's some other topics that and organizations that are sort of flying around me right now, and I might take one of those other offers first.
Right. No, I understand that. Speaking of your paintings, one of them did play at the Energy Summit held at Stanford.
Every year, a premier event occurs at Stanford. It's the Silicon Valley Energy Summit. They bring in VIPs like the former or existing head of the United States Department of Energy. This year, he was there, Dr. Chu, but they had 2 people who report to the governor of California, and they have some other people who are international, okay. And at that event, they dealt with so many different topics. I'll come to the topics, but let me just now say how they treated me, or how they use what I produce. When all 400 of the attendees and the speakers walked into the lobby of this palatial building, the Arriaga Alumni Conference Center, there in the lobby, there was only one painting, a 15-foot, 6-foot high painting on easel, so it's really up there. And it was Stanford's Smart Energy Campus. Again, 15 feet, 6 feet. I painted it. And I painted the old energy system that the university had and the new one that they just built for $500 million. And I, in the painting, tell the story of what was bad about the old system, burning gas and having it go up and circle the earth, and the massive amount of water that system was wasting. And then I connected it with the new system. So Stanford liked it, of course, put it in the lobby, and then everyone was handed a handout that described what was going to happen all day long. On the back cover, outside cover, they put the painting, my name, the title, and then, that's nice, and then I sit down, and in the center of the wall where the speakers are, they had a tape running, and videotape running, and they were basically promoting all the sponsors. And up came every minute my painting, which I thought was nice. But then when Jim Sweeney, the head of the Stanford event, started to walk up onto the stage, just as he got to the podium to start the event, 2 gigantic screens lit up. I didn't even see them up there. I look up, and all of a sudden, Stanford displayed my painting over here and here. These are big images. They kept the 2 paintings up with the name of the painting and my name for 6 hours, maybe 7 hours, in front of all 400 persons, which is, and I said to myself, wow, I was touched that Stanford would take advantage and use what I made as an example to other organizations around the world on what they can do if they do what Stanford did, use the technology implemented in a certain way. They too could reduce energy use, water use, increase energy efficiency, and stop putting up greenhouse gas. I was touched.
That's terrific. What was reaction of participants that you heard or that came to you and talked with you?
People would go like this to me. Hey, Michael. Others would say to me, especially friends of mine or colleagues of mine, said, hey, Michael, shouldn't we rename this the Silicon Valley Michael Killen event? Because my stuff was everywhere. But then I do want to say, this painting was not made specifically to promote Stanford's investment. I was painting California's climate plan. Mm-hmm. It has roughly 6 goals of it. And I've been knocking off one goal after another. And so I got to the goal that has the description or title of double the energy efficiency savings at existing buildings. Buildings and transportation are really the 2 biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. So when I got to this particular goal, and by the way, I've already done Safeguard California, I have done Ocean Change, protect the oceans, I've done one other, but when I decided to paint California's climate change, double the energy efficiency savings in existing buildings, I said, let's not try to do it with management concepts or anything of that sort. Why don't I give the world an example of how to do it, how to attain that goal? And so I selected Stanford's. I had heard they invested and were ecstatic at the success of their new energy system. So I decided to paint an example. And it really, the kind of solution really fits what's called a distributed building solution. A building where somebody owns, let's say, multiple buildings, 5, 6, a cluster of them. And so that's how the painting came about, and I am so delighted with how Stanford loves it.
That's fabulous. And it's also absolutely fabulous that we had this time to talk and be together and get caught up on what you're doing. And I am so appreciative to you for taking your time to speak with me today. And it's just great. Thank you for being here, my friend.
I have to thank you, Johnathan. I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate your skill.
I appreciate your appreciation.
Just don't get better ratings than me.
I'll do all I can. And to you out there, thank you for being with us on this episode of The Killen Report. I'm Johnathan Kleid.